Welcome to another deep dive. You know how this works. We take the research you've given us and we try to condense it into something a little more manageable.
Exactly, like a more digestible form.
Right. And today we're looking at a culinary journey through American history.
Okay, and we're using that podcast episode of American History that you sent, along with the book U.S. History in 15 Foods.
Sounds good. It's amazing to think about all the ways food's tied into pretty much everything.
Oh, yeah, economics and culture, technology, even politics.
You name it. Okay, so first up is corn. Honestly, I didn't realize it wasn't just, a natural grain.
Right. The fact that indigenous societies basically engineered it over thousands of years is mind-blowing.
Makes you appreciate that bag of popcorn a lot more, huh?
For sure. They even developed all sorts of different types for different environments.
That's a level of sophistication that kind of clashes with the way Europeans saw it, right? Like they considered it lower class.
Absolutely. And you have to wonder how much that hunger for land to grow corn impacted things.
Like the conflicts between colonists and Native Americans.
Exactly. That need for food, for survival, it's a driving force in history. We often overlook it.
We do. It's interesting how, like in Jamestown, they were trading for corn, but in Plymouth, they were learning to actually grow it themselves.
Oh, yeah, like that whole teach a man to fish idea.
Exactly.
Yep.
But then there's the sad part of corn's
Its
story.
connection to slavery, unfortunately.
Yeah, it became this crop that needed so much labor,
Mhm.
and then at the same time was the main food for enslaved people.
Such a complex relationship. And, even today, it's kind of scary how much corn is in our food.
Right. The omnivore's dilemma really brought that home.
All those lab tests on fast food. You wouldn't believe it. And even just how the word itself changed.
From just meaning any grain in England to Indian corn and now just corn.
Yeah, kind of shows how it became such a central part of things. Speaking of changes, we should probably move on to, let's see,
Yeah, it's the 1800s now. We've got Sylvester Graham,
graham bread.
or should we say graham crackers? I bet more people know those.
Probably true. But he was this reformer, really interesting guy.
To understand him, though, we got to picture the time, right? Like early industrialization, cities were seen as unhealthy.
Oh, yeah, there were cholera outbreaks, all this anxiety about immigration. It was a chaotic time.
And then you have white bread, this super processed food.
Graham saw it as a symbol of all that chaos. He thought whole wheat was more wholesome.
It wasn't just about health, though, was it?
No, it was about control. People felt like the world was changing too fast.
Makes sense. And he actually had a whole following, like people who call themselves Grahamites.
Yeah, they had their own journals, even boarding houses, all dedicated to his ideas.
It's crazy how food can become like a movement.
It really is. And this was happening alongside all those other reforms, too.
Abolition, women's suffrage, temperance.
Right. Although you have to remember, all that stuff took decades.
It did. And I got to say, it's kind of ironic that what most people remember him for is graham crackers.
Yeah, a sugary snack. Although the flour itself, the graham flour, it was just unbolted wheat.
Meaning?
Like the whole grain was ground up, bran and all. Nothing like white flour today.
So it started out pure, at least. Okay, what's the next food on our list?
I'm ready for it. Let's hear it.
Peanuts. But get this, they're not actually nuts.
Yeah, it's a legume, like peas and beans.
Mind blown, right? And they had such a bad reputation.
Oh, yeah, like animal food. Poor people's food.
And because enslaved people were associated with them, that made them even less desirable.
Right, exactly. But then the Civil War happened and everything changed.
That Union blockade really forced people to get creative.
Talk about resourcefulness. They were making peanut oil, a coffee substitute, even flour.
But then, the really weird part is how after the war, peanuts became this symbol of the lost cause.
Right. It's so interesting how a food can get completely rebranded.
And then you have George Washington Carver,
Yeah.
who did all that incredible work with peanuts.
He was amazing. Like, he saw how they could really help Southern agriculture, came up with hundreds of uses for them.
From peanut butter to cooking oil, even dyes and plastics.
Incredible, right.
Yeah.
But we got to remember, all that success was built on black labor.
Yeah. And those farmers were facing Jim Crow laws at the same time.
It's a reminder that even something as simple as a peanut can have a really complex history.
Speaking of complex histories, are you ready for this next one? It's an American icon.
Lay it on me.
Spam. Gotta ask, are you a fan?
I wouldn't say fan exactly, but I am fascinated by it. It's like so American,
You mentioned a story about your dad.
Oh, yeah. He grew up in Russia during World War II.
Yes.
American soldiers would share Spam from their rations, and he
Oh.
thought it was the best thing ever. Ironic because he became vegetarian later, but, it was like the symbol of aid.
That's a great story. Shows how food can go beyond culture and politics sometimes.
Absolutely. War is probably the single most powerful instrument of dietary change, I think the book said.
Wow. And Spam is the perfect example, right? It was nutrient dense, lasted forever, easy to ship.
Exactly what they needed during wartime, especially when there were so many food shortages.
It's sad to think about,
It
but just as many people died from starvation as in battle.
really makes you think. But anyway, back to Spam. Where does the name even come from?
Spiced ham.
Makes sense, right?
Yeah, basically just pork shoulder, salt, sugar, and sodium nitrate.
The real trick was figuring out how to keep cooked meat fresh in a can.
And then their marketing was genius, Spam with everything.
They were all over the radio, which was pretty new then.
Paid off big time. It was already becoming a household name even before the war.
And then the war just solidified its place in history, huh?
Absolutely. It's like American ingenuity, resilience, and maybe even a little nostalgia for tougher times.
Get ready for the last stop on this culinary tour. It's an all-American classic.
Let me guess.
Hamburgers.
2 all-beef patties, special sauce, lettuce, cheese, pickles, onions on a sesame seed bun.
Oh, you went for the full jingle, the Big Mac. Gotta love it.
By the 90s, that was basically McDonald's, and McDonald's was global.
Right, for better or worse, it's such a symbol of American culture.
The jingle's so catchy.
Right.
But McDonald's is interesting, isn't it? Like, they're super efficient, affordable.
But some people see them as, American cultural imperialism.
Definitely two sides to the coin.
Like, they embody both the good and bad of American influence on the world.
I remember being in Moscow right after the Soviet Union fell, and McDonald's was huge there.
Wow.
Yeah, it was like this sign of the changing times, the end of the Cold War. Crazy to think about.
It really makes you think about how a hamburger can be so loaded. Yeah.
Yeah, like it's more than just food at that point.
Right. So tell me more about that McDonald's in Moscow.
What was it like being there and seeing it firsthand?
It was wild. Like, picture this, right? Golden arches above a city that was, for so long, basically closed off.
Yeah, totally different vibe.
And there were lines around the block. People wanted that taste of America, of that new world that was opening up.
It was like a tangible sign of things changing.
Exactly. That taste of freedom, almost.
It's amazing how food can be that bridge.
Totally. And I think it was more than just the food. It was the idea of it, right?
Like hope for the future.
Right. A chance to be part of something bigger. Wow. So we've covered a lot of ground here.
Corn, graham bread, peanuts, Spam, even McDonald's. It's really incredible how these foods are all woven into American history.
And each one tells a different story, right? About our values, our culture.
And the things that shaped us. But we've only scratched the surface, right? The book goes into 15 different foods.
Oh, yeah. Spaghetti, oranges, pot liquor.
Pot liquor.
Yeah, it's this southern thing, basically the broth left over from cooking greens.
Oh, interesting.
And Korean tacos. It really shows how diverse American food is.
That it's not just one story, but this mix of everything.
Exactly. And it all adds up to who we are, how we got here.
It makes you think about food differently.
It does. Like, it's never just about filling your stomach.
Right. It's this whole storybook of experiences.
And that story keeps going, Every time we eat, we're part of it.
So before we finish this deep dive, I want to leave our listeners with something to think about.
Okay, I like it.
Think about the foods you eat all the time, the ones that seem really ordinary.
Like the stuff you don't even think twice about.
Exactly. Now ask yourself, what are their hidden histories?
What got them to your plate? It's like a culinary mystery.
Right. That peanut butter you have, maybe it's connected to George Washington Carver.
Or to black farmers who made peanuts a staple crop.
Or that can of corn. Maybe it's a reminder of how clever those indigenous societies were.
It's pretty mind-blowing when you start digging.
The point is, food is never just food. It's a story waiting to be told.
And who knows, maybe you'll uncover something amazing in your own kitchen.
It's kind of crazy, right? Like you go to the store and you don't even think about all this stuff.
Yeah, you just grab your groceries.
But there's so much history behind every ingredient.
Absolutely. And it's not just about, where the food comes from, but all those other forces,
The economic side of things, the politics.
It all plays a role. One thing that really struck me during this conversation,
What's that?
it's how food can be both like a source of conflict and also a way to bring people together.
Oh, yeah, that's a good point.
We saw how the need for land to grow corn caused all those problems between colonists and Native Americans.
Right. And then the Civil War changed how people saw peanuts.
They went from being a lowly food to the symbol of the South.
But then you have those stories like your dad's.
Yeah, the Spam thing, that was about connection,
American soldiers sharing with Russian kids.
Right. It went beyond the politics.
And even McDonald's, as complicated as it is, it's a way for people to connect.
Through food, yeah. It's interesting, isn't it?
Food can divide us or unite us. It's both.
It's true. It just shows you that what we eat is never simple.
There's always more to the story.
Way more. So I think we've given everyone a lot to chew on today.
We have. Hopefully we've gotten people curious about all this.
I hope so. There's so much to explore when it comes to food history.
It's a whole world out there. So, to wrap things up, we encourage you to keep digging into those food stories.
Yeah, take a closer look at what's on your plate.
You never know what you might discover. Each bite is a little piece of history.
And a taste of the future, too. Who knows?
Well, thanks for joining us for this deep dive, everyone. Until next time.